Why are we, the players, part of Deltarune? As the unique appearance of the save screen before completing any chapter strongly suggests, Gaster's control over this world is incredible, so what could he possibly need us for? He can copy, delete and create new timelines whenever we request, yet this whole adventure began because he invited us to create a new future with him through survey program. It seems that even this level of power is not enough to accomplish whatever his goals are. To me, Gaster is a stand-in for the author of a story, indeed the author of the story of Deltarune itself, since, as many people have pointed out, it is very likely that he created the prophecy guiding our steps, with quite a few details supporting this, especially him being shadowed across time and space, referenced by Ralsei's prophecy foretold across time and space, as well as Sham's view of the world becoming darker yet darker, upon learning the same knowledge that drove Jeffel insane. And yes, I know the annoying dog exists, but that to me is a more literal avatar of Tricky Tony, the game developer. Not quite the same as Gaster, the one who writes the story that we experience while playing. It might seem a bit weird at first that there will be two different representations of the author in the game, but I'd argue it doesn't even stop there, with Gerson being yet another character that is the author of a story within the story, the Lord of the Hammer, which is also closely related to the prophecy of Deltarune. Besides, why wouldn't the characters represent the author in different ways? A good story comes from the heart after all, with each character coming into existence because they truly matter to the creator. Once again then, why would an all-powerful author of a story need our help? To go on an adventure he already knows the ending of, to guide a party of heroes on the only path that exists. Well, the problem is that writing a story is never that simple. All too often it begins with a beautiful idea that the author cannot stop obsessing over, that drives them to shape a whole new world just so they can see it realized. But it rarely ends up as easy as that, and inevitably doubts creep in, unforeseen obstacles arise that prevent the story from being told the way the author imagined at first. You might think the author is completely in control, but what they are really limited by is their own mind, their biases and beliefs. Gaster wrote himself into a corner and cannot find a way out on his own, not because he lacks the power to change any aspect of the world and story, rather he lacks determination. He became too attached to the idea, the prophecy that he wrote himself, his Deltarune. That is why he needs our help, to find a way that he is blind to because of his obsession. What I believe, as the Forgotten Man asked us, is that the world really did look like this, and then it looked as presented in the Mantle game we play on the Sword Route. And now it looks as we all see it when playing Deltarune. All of these forms are iterations, attempts at making the story work. As the story evolved, so did the world, becoming more complex, larger, giving more options. When I first started playing Deltarune, the detail that immediately caught my eye was the bloodstain in the cage next to Chris's bed. It felt so out of place, almost ominous, and the fact that it's only really addressed in Chapter 4, where Susie comments on the cage and helps Chris clean up the blood, just makes it stand out to me like a sore thumb. Maybe it's nothing more than another hint towards Storio being disconnected from Chris and not understanding their issues, pretending like everything is okay, but I think it's more important than that. The way Chris behaves when it comes to handling the soul makes it feel like they are completely used to this situation, like they have been dealing with it for a long time already. Perhaps this level of preparedness could be explained by the theory that Chris willingly summoned the soul and knew what they were getting into ahead of time. But my interpretation is that we are not the first. The survey program allowed us to connect to Deltarune's world and experience it through the game that we all know and love. But before us, other people connected to this world in order to control Chris's soul and through it attempt to guide the story. However, those previous attempts were not good enough, and their failure led to our current iteration, a final, desperate move. Some people have joked that the peculiar way Third Sanctuary repeats makes it sound like a ringtone. To me, however, this repetitive nature is actually rather significant to the story. You see, the primary concern of Chapter 4 is the struggle of being forced to follow a predestined path laid out in the prophecy, But with this interpretation of iterating on the story to reach a desired ending, the repetition becomes meaningful. The Dark Sanctuary represents the initial basic idea that was the seed for the whole story, simple and beautiful with clear religious tones, not surprising given that the prophecy is literally the foundation of Hometown's faith. The second sanctuary shows a different perspective. The lighting has changed, revealing flaws and obstacles that prevent the story from reaching a satisfying conclusion, but at the same time showing just how closely connected the three heroes are to the prophecy, how important it is to each of them as people. The cage, the girl with hope crossed on her heart, the lonely prince. And the third sanctuary is overwhelming, with the knight always one step ahead, and the party surrounded by countless randomly scattered parts of the prophecy, trying to find any order within the chaos, any path that leads to the ending. The prophecy that at first seemed reassuring, guiding Chris, Susie and Rousey on the path to saving their world, now seems more like a burden. Are they strong enough to do what it says must be done? Do they even have any say in the matter? As Susie says during one of the climbing sections, she found comfort in the prophecy, finally feeling like she has a place in the world, feeling that she has hope written in truth, written somewhere no one can erase. But when she learns how high of a price may need to be paid, it all shatters into pieces. The repeating motif is, to me, a musical representation of struggling to find a path forward, a way of fulfilling the prophecy that doesn't leave a bitter taste in our mouths. We're starting over and over and over until something changes. Gaster could not accomplish this, but with so many of us working together, could we break through this barrier and change the fate of the world? A small detail regarding the prophecy is the wording of the Shadow Crystal flavor text that I haven't seen others point out. The prophecy's text does not warp, but all throughout Chapter 4, a large part of how we and the characters interpret the prophecy are the stained glass visuals that accompany each line. Gerson strongly implies that although the prophecy might appear unbreakable, there is often vagueness in its words, and we can look between the lines and draw our own conclusions. Just think of the whole debacle with who is the last girl, and the girl with hope crossed on her heart. Susie certainly thinks it's her, which would fit with the last girl being represented by the Root Buster image. But then why does the second hero wield a sword? Could it actually be Noelle? The silhouette still looks more like Susie though. Suffice to say, as much as Rousey wants to believe, or wants us to believe, that the prophecy dictates every move of the heroes, what we know of the prophecy does leave room for a different path. There is an elephant in the room that must be addressed. I've seen people suggest this before and it seems unavoidable with this interpretation of the story. Could Deltarune have an open ending, where the prophecy is subverted by the game saying that we must create the conclusion ourselves? Either by creating mods, writing fanfics, drawing art, or simply imagining how the story ends and accepting that in place of any answer provided by the game itself. This feels like an incredibly risky move that could make an amazing adventure, and not with a bang but a whimper, even if only by dividing the community based on how each person believes the story should end. But I do not want to completely ignore this possibility, given that Undertale is famously incredibly responsive to player choice, with not just the pacifist and genocide endings, but dozens of neutral variations accounting for whatever decisions the player makes. If anyone could pull off an ending even more complex than that, it would be Toby Fox. Remember, Undertale was created in the first place because he realized his skills were not sufficient to create Deltarune. With all the experience he has gained, who's to say what he has in store for us? As a side note, I want to discuss Shadow Crystals and Black Shards a bit. When Chapters 3 and 4 released, I saw quite a few people talking about the Black Shard as if it is the same thing as a Shadow Crystal, specifically that what Asgore has is a Shadow Crystal, and I simply could not understand why. The two items are opposites when you look at them closer. The only point of confusion could be at the end of Chapter 3 when you pick up both the Shadow Crystal and Black Shard in the same place, but even then they are specifically two separate items. Shadow Crystals being completely transparent to the point that you can only notice them by the shadows they cast. the black shard being completely black and opaque. Shadow crystals being key items with a mysterious function and the promise of becoming something truly extraordinary if we gather enough of them for Sean. The black shard being a powerful weapon that aids us in destroying the darkness that it came from. I don't even think the black shard that Asgore talks about refers to the black katana that can be seen when looking at the unobscured image of Carol's room. To me, his line reads like he carries his black shard with him as a constant reminder of what he must do. By the way, it would be so cool if, assuming we have to fight Asgore in Chapter 5, he pulled out his black shard and then noticed that Chris wields a black shard of their own against him. What would he think? What would he say in reaction to that? Would it finally make him realize that his obsession with the past is causing him to leave his child to fend for themselves against deadly threats, completely failing as a parent? I could accept, though, that shadow crystals and black shards are strongly connected, perhaps being two sides of one coin that somehow split apart. Almost sounds like another allegory for whatever happened to Des. When we overhear Asgore talking to himself during Chapter 4 and he mentions this black shard, the interpretation is obvious to me. This monologue doesn't happen too long into Chapter 4, and if you played it shortly after Chapter 3, the memory of fighting the Roaring Knight should still be fresh in your mind. Thus, the Asgore monologue suggests something similar happened to him. Whatever event caused Des to go missing, caused him to lose his job, ruined his marriage with Toriel, made him obsessed with a conspiracy that he has a whole board dedicated to in his basement, involved Asgore fighting the Roaring Knight to a standstill, chipping off a black shard from the knight's black knife, but still losing in the end. Now I know that most signs point towards Des being the Roaring Knight, so how could Asgore fight the knight? How could the timeline of events make sense? I think it is not as simple as Des becoming the knight, but more so that she was split apart, with her body becoming corrupted by darkness, and her soul becoming so lost that we can only hear it through the unused lines of dialogue hidden in the code. The room with the black monster, the third part of the mental game, might in fact represent December's situation, as the monster sprite actually replaces a black deer that can be found in the game files, and the movements of Chris and the monster mirror each other, implying a close connection, and people even theorize that the soul inside Chris could actually be Des' soul, that Chris ended up with as a result of something that happened in the bunker. I also do not believe Asgore is working together with Carol to save December. To me, the situation feels more like Carol simply hiring Asgore to take care of simple chores, allowing him to earn some money to support himself, perhaps out of pity, as whatever happened with Des' disappearance and Asgore losing his position as police chief. It does not feel like either Carol or Rudy hold a grudge against Asgore, which by the way is incredibly interesting considering how different Toriel's opinion on the matter evidently is, even though we would expect the roles to be reversed given that it is Carol and Rudy's daughter that went missing. Instead, I think that Carol investigates what happened to Des on her own, but does not share her findings with Asgore because she believes he is too incompetent to help her. She underestimates him after he failed to do his job, but Asgore secretly has his own investigation and uses the opportunity of working at Carol's house while she is away to gather information that she otherwise would not give to him. If anything, I would guess Asgore is working with Rudy, the old friend that he mentions. Okay, let me just quickly complain about a couple other pet peeves of mine. I don't see why so many people are completely sure that Irem is a character that, exists and has the Shadow Mantle in Chapter 3, rather than the Shadow Mantle itself being alive and able to transform as needed. This has already been shown to be possible with Jevil and Spamton transforming into either a piece of armor or a weapon, and Spamton transforming back for the cutscene in Chapter 3. Then again, the monologue in the final part of the Sword Rat does state quite directly. So maybe I'm just overthinking this. But the Shadow Mantle holder also says another interesting thing there, especially on the Weird Rod, which adds 2 more lines. I've seen quite a few interpretations that this is the holder talking directly to Chris, and thus Chris secretly wants to hurt people or is evil or whatever. But while I don't want to pretend that Chris is perfect, and this definitely implies a darker side to them, with another piece of information supporting this appearing in the Chapter 4 egg room, those lines can just as easily apply to the Weird Route players reading them, and at most, the blame is shared between Chris and the player. Putting the responsibility on Chris alone just makes me think of the Why would Kara make me do this? Jokes. There has to be some reasonable middle ground between giving ourselves a free pass to do anything we want because Chris is secretly an evil mastermind, and thinking that we are evil just for playing the game because it puts us in control of an innocent teenager. The Holder's mention of a sour face and seeing in the dark makes sense when applied to Chris, yes, but it also reminds me of the Angel Prophecy panel in Chapter 4, the one that people theorize is covered up so that we can see our own reflection in the dark screen. One last thing about the relationship between us and Chris. For chapters 3 and 4 I was in the camp that whoever it was that created the chapter 2 Dark Fountain, it could not have been Chris, as their sluggish movements after they removed the soul in the first 2 chapters imply that they need it just to stay alive, and without it they have very little time and strength to do things, so they simply could not reach the library in time. However, what happens in the Holiday Manor in Chapter 4, especially what Noelle says during the Weird Road cutscene, changed my mind. Noelle says that Chris visited her during the night. They were able to interact with her normally enough to the point that she thought, "Chris, you're back." So their movement and speech must not have been impeded by the absence of the soul. Indeed, it seems to be the opposite. Our control over Chris restricts their actions, and what I believe now is that this influence lingers for a time after they take out the soul, perhaps simply because it is painful, or perhaps that as long as we can see them, their freedom is limited, even if only a bit. They have to follow the script, making it difficult to move and talk. This would explain why Ralsei makes us look away during chapters 1 and 2, and why Chris shambles like a zombie after ripping out the soul. So it seems that Chris does need the soul, yes, but not just to live. There's some more complex goal that the soul is necessary for, as the person on the phone says. Maybe it's closing dark fountains, maybe it's entering dark worlds at all. Maybe it's surviving fights with darkness. Anyway, apologies if this got incoherent, but my primary goal was to just get my thoughts about Deltarune out of my head, as well as repaying a bit of all that this game and its community has given me. In the end, I don't care that much if any of these ideas end up instantly disproven when more chapters come out. If anything, I will be happily surprised and excited to see something I could not predict. As long as it keeps being such a heartfelt story that has made me laugh and tear up so many times already, I will be happy.